What's up, everybody? Welcome to a magical episode of OC and TJ. It's sad we're almost done with the division previews, but to be quite honest, I think that we're just waiting for week one already. Preseason has begun. Hard Knocks has aired for the first time last week, and yeah, I'm at the point where, all right, I've been watching preseason and it's all right, it's not bad, but also I know it's like when you see the starters, it's like, all right, that was fun after 10 minutes. But we're previewing the AFC North. Speaking of Hard Knocks, since they're being on the regular season version this year, and it's going to be one of the most competitive and tough divisions because of all the quarterback hype and the defenses that are trying to shut down one another, and of course you got the rivalry between Lamar and Joe Burrow brewing up. But before we get into that, it's OC. This is TJ. What's going on? How you doing?
Doing well. I mean, I think these preseason games, I have been, poking around a little bit of them, but I think mainly it just kind of gets you. I've mentioned this all the time, but like it really just gets you hyped for like the actual games, but it's kind of like a tease, and you're just like, damn, I like kind of just want the actual games. But yeah, I only got 3 of these left, which is pretty insane.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, every team in this division last year had a winning record, so. Um, it's definitely it's poised to be another pretty crazy division, I think. And I mean, some of the best rivalries in sports are in this division, right? So I mean, it's excited to see what ends up happening and excited to talk about it too. So
yeah. It's also too bad that we did the AFC East preview last week because after finding out that Hassan Reddick has requested a trade from the Jets while not even reporting to the facilities, it's just we have like a bizarre situation going
yeah.
on in the NFL offseason. It's definitely been brewing up at the right time. So hopefully by September we actually have more clarity on what we're going to expect come week one. But this is what division previews are all about, setting the stage. And I think because of that, we should just get right into it and talk about the Baltimore Ravens. So last two times, TJ's gotten the first nod just because both of us got the chance to preview our respective teams. But now we're flipping it back, and I'll take the lead on Baltimore here. The defending number one seed in the AFC, 14-3 record, 14-3 or 13-4. Either way, um, after a couple injury-riddled seasons for Lamar Jackson, where they missed the playoffs the first time and then got bounced out of the wild card the second time, Lamar Jackson was able to play all 17 games. Obviously, the last one he rested because they had already clinched a playoff spot, and he won his second MVP. Obviously, the athleticism was still there with his legs, but he got better as a passer. He showed more maturity as a player, and we were just hoping for the best in the playoffs. But we also knew that there were going to be some potential downfalls, and that showed against the Chiefs when they hardly ran the ball. They turned the ball over 3 times, and when Lamar Jackson was asked to lift them out of the mud, he failed to do so. But this year, it's really more of an adjustment period because Mike McDonald is now the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. They let go of some pieces on both sides of the ball, but I think they're still going to be as strong as ever on both sides because in the running game, you let J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards go, but what better consolation prize to have than King Derrick Henry? Obviously, not the same running back that he once was in 2019 or 2020, but he's still playing at a really high level. He's a 1,000-yard back on any given night. He's still one of the hardest dudes to tackle on the field. And I think with him and Lamar Jackson in that backfield alone, it's just going to be extra hard for defenders to stop. Now, hopefully the scheme that Todd Monken has doesn't completely leave us disappointed. But I think that, with great players, I think you could get a lot of positive results. And one of the biggest positive effects that we saw was their passing game because we saw the emergence of Zay Flowers. We saw Rashad Bateman come along. Obviously, before he got injured, Mark Andrews was still one of the top tight ends in the league. And when he went down, Isaiah Likely did a really good job of picking up the slack. And they really didn't change too much on that side of the ball, besides obviously cutting Odell Beckham Jr. You lost a couple of guys on the offensive line, such as John Simpson and Morgan Moses, but you still have Tyler Linderbaum. It's still one of the best run blocking lines in the league. And with Lamar Jackson, who's as great as he is, I don't think it's going to be as big of a flaw as we think. Now, maybe we'll be wrong halfway through the season, but right now, I don't think we have to worry about it too much. Last year, though, the biggest strength was their defense. One of the best passing units in the league, led the whole NFL in sacks, and you brought most of their core guys back. You have Justin Madubuike locked up to a 4-year deal. You got Roquan Smith. You still have Marlon Humphrey. Even though you let Patrick Queen walk away in free agency, as well as Jadeveon Clowney, you still have some guys in your rotation that really stepped up when they were needed the most. And they drafted a couple rising corners in Nate Wiggins and TJ Tampa. And you have the best safety in the league, or one of the top 2 safeties in the league, in Kyle Hamilton. Even though Mike McDonald is gone, you still have, assistant that got promoted. I think is it Denard Wilson? I'm not really
the
sure.
DC, yeah. He was because he was their DB's coach, right?
I think so. I might get confused. I don't know if it's him or if I'm confusing that with another person. But the point is, the scheme is still going to stay the same, and you're going to introduce more exotic plays and coverages. So I think that the defense is still going to stay as strong as ever. It may not be top of the league, but I still think it'll be within the top 5 to 10 range. So, in my opinion, this year's Super Bowl or bust for Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. I saw on First Take, someone say that they pretty much have no expectations because they're just going to disappoint us. And while there is some truth to that side of the argument, when you're Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, you have no excuse but to get to the Super Bowl and potentially win one. Because even though Patrick Mahomes is in a class of himself, Joe Burrow has been to a Super Bowl and he's in your division. Josh Allen has at least been to an AFC Championship game and he's beating you to get to that point. And you have other guys on the rise that are establishing themselves as big threats. Even Brock Purdy took the 49ers to a Super Bowl. So when you're a 2-time MVP, there are no more excuses. It's up to you, or else this season is going to be a complete failure. And I'm not going to say you have to move on from him if you do, because that's just completely ludicrous in itself. But we're going to look at him a lot differently if they underachieve once again, as well as the whole organization, because to have this much promise in the regular season only to fall short time and time again, you're looking like the Dallas Cowboys of the AFC, and we can't have that. The floor is yours.
Yeah. I mean, I pretty much agree with that. I think with the Ravens, it just comes down to like the last little bit of the playoffs, right? Like, 'cause last year, I mean, like I really thought like they were gonna take it the whole distance, but ultimately they faced the top tier team, right? Like they faced the Chiefs, and that's ultimately they really could not score anything. There's so many self-inflicted mistakes, and we knew the defense for the Chiefs was so good. So that's something they're going to need to, they play them week 1, so we'll be able to get a real taste and right off the bat if that was just kind of a fluke game. But I get playoffs is different, but still I'm excited to see that game. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with their offense. Like it really took strides in the passing game, and Lamar really had like 2 kind of down-ish years for his standards prior. But I mean, really, you just saw that pass game kind of, really take off. And I mean, you could even make an argument the run game, Lamar's run game might be even better this year, right? Because adding Derrick Henry, which we'll get into obviously, but really on paper, like this team made a lot of improvements, but losing Mike McDonald, like that could present some issues, which we'll talk about as well. But I mean, the Ravens are still great. We know that. It's just a matter of like, in comparison to last year, how they'll continue. So,
yeah. So let's actually talk about this Super Bowl window. In your opinion, do you think it's slammed shut after last year, or is it just slightly open?
It's always open when you have a 2-time MVP, I think. So I think as long as they have Lamar, like it's going to be open, and the Ravens continuously draft well. They have a good offensive line, like they have good defense, like they're going to be fine for the foreseeable future, unless the team just kind of implodes, or Lamar Jackson's not here, which he is for the next 4 years. So, yeah, I think their Super Bowl window is very much wide open. It's just the reality of the situation is they play in the same conference as the Chiefs, and that. We talked about it last week with the Bills. We talked about it with Jets, and there's other teams in this division that we'll talk about that ultimately just don't. They obviously present the biggest threat to the Chiefs, I'd say, one of at least, but other teams in this conference really just can't even match up to them. So that's really what it comes down to. But yeah, I mean, in terms of a roster and just their overall outlook, like, yeah, like there's not really, their Super Bowl window is definitely very much open, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's slightly open too, but it's just I think after this year, if they don't even get to the Super Bowl, then I think it's slammed shut because we pretty much just know what we're about to expect. And obviously that definitely could change over time because as we've seen in the NBA, it took Michael Jordan 7 years to get to win his first championship. It took LeBron James 9. It took a lot of greats, a very long time at a very old age to get their first ring under their belts. So it can happen, later on, but it's just at some point in time when you see these other quarterbacks reach these points in their careers at a faster point and you've had more accolades, there does come a point in time where you're like, okay, what the hell is it going to take for you to get over the hump? And I've said this with plenty of different teams in the past, but if you're Lamar Jackson, who's got 2 MVPs, the second most out of any other active quarterback in the league, active young quarterback, I should say, because obviously you have Aaron Rodgers. But the point is, when you're Lamar Jackson and you've seen that Josh Allen has gotten to a conference championship, Joe Burrow and Brock Purdy get to Super Bowls, Patrick Mahomes win 3 rings, and you're on the outside looking in with some of these other guys, like even Jalen Hurts has even gotten to the Super Bowl. I completely forgot about that. And you're Lamar Jackson and you haven't even done that. Yeah, the critics are going to be loud and they're going to be justified. But besides the Chiefs, who do you think is the one team that is standing in Baltimore's way in the AFC?
I mean, I know the Ravens have had success against them, but I'd probably say the Bengals are probably the biggest. I mean, obviously the Chiefs I just mentioned, but besides them, yeah, I'd say probably the Bengals, and then I can't even really think of another, to be honest, because
you got the Texans, but we have
I
yet to
still
see
don't
what
think
they
the
can do.
Texans, at least where the Texans stand right now, I still think the Ravens match up pretty well against them. So I probably wouldn't even say that. I would say they'd
There's the
come.
Texans. You got the Dolphins and the Jets, but even then, you
Those
haven't seen
teams,
enough of
no.
them.
Though I don't even think like the Ravens, they maybe could steal a game from them, but like a true threat, like I don't think the Jets, Dolphins, or Texans are at this point. So I'd probably go the Bengals just because of Burrow and that defense, their coaching staff, everything like that, which we'll get into. But I really don't think there's many. I think the Chiefs are really their big kryptonite. I mean, if you get the Bills in the playoffs, probably them too. We just don't know what is going to go on with them with the changes they've made. But yeah, I mean, any of the elite quarterbacks that are in the AFC, right? Like if Stroud is on the trajectory, like, yeah, I think Texans could be. But we saw last year, like the Ravens kind of ate the Texans lunch. So I think, we'll have to wait and see about that.
Right. I think you got the Chiefs one, and I agree with you. I think the Bengals are the next best threat because you already play them twice a year. And even though Baltimore has beaten you before in the regular season, I mean, remember, the Ravens were a fumble away from actually potentially upsetting the Bengals in the playoffs a couple of years ago. And really, the biggest reason why Baltimore couldn't pull through is because their starting quarterback wasn't healthy. So I think Cincinnati is definitely the second biggest team that's in their way because, listen, I mean, like I said earlier, Joe Burrow has had more postseason success. And I know wins aren't a quarterback stat, but at the same time, it's like you have actually been the catalyst of those types of teams that has gotten to the Super Bowl, that's been in multiple conference championship games. And if Joe Burrow was fully healthy last year, who knows how far the Bengals could have gone. So I think, obviously the Chiefs are the biggest threat because Lamar Jackson has yet to beat Patrick Mahomes when it truly matters most. He's only gotten one single win against him, and that was in week 2 of a regular season game in 2021. So enough is enough, and it's put up or shut up when it comes to the Baltimore Ravens. But let's talk about Derrick Henry for a second because, again, is he in like the prime of his career? Not really, because even though he's still capable of having 1,000 yards and having multiple touchdown seasons, he's definitely, nearing the age of 30. He's had plenty of mileage on it, but how hype or how legitimate is the hype surrounding him with this new team? Because remember, in 2019, he was the biggest reason why the Ravens were sent home in the playoffs.
It's tough with Derrick Henry because the wheels could fall off literally at any point, and we just can't you can't predict it because last year
Right.
he was still good. So, but like it's like you have to really go on a year-to-year basis with Derrick Henry because the mileage is starting to add up. Like in terms of overall carries, like he's in the leaderboard, I would assume for like top all time, obviously. But um, if he replicates last season, like yeah, that should be legitimate. It's just a matter of if it falls off and he's 31, like maybe they get a season out of it, but long term, like I don't think this is a huge move, but it could prove to be this year, especially the first few weeks because of how much a threat he poses at this point in his career. Like the threat of him and Lamar Jackson in the same backfield is pretty wild. So, um, yeah, this could at least it'll definitely start out as a pretty. I think just what it causes defenses to do, essentially. I think that'll be huge. But if Derrick Henry plays the way he did last season with like a really bad Titans offensive line, like it could prove to be a good move. So I love the move. I
Yeah.
think it's great, but
It's a
it just
low risk deal too because he's only getting $8 million a year for 2 seasons. So
right. So low risk. I mean, Ravens might in this Super Bowl window, it was the perfect landing spot for him. So especially with his offensive line too, like can't beat it.
exactly. So I think we're all settled on the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, later on at the end of the show, we'll discuss if we have them winning back-to-back AFC North titles or if they're gonna potentially make it in as a wild card team. But let's head over to the Cleveland Browns, who last year had the best defense in football or the best total yards defense in all of football. And even with Joe Flacco coming off the couch, they still made the playoffs and made it as a fifth seed. So TJ, I let you discuss them and see where we're heading this year with this football team.
I mean, they're a huge. But I feel like they were a huge question mark last year, so it's always going to be tough to say with the Cleveland Browns.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Looking at it just from like an overall roster perspective, really good, right? Like Nick Chubb coming off that injury is going to be the big factor, but I think with him still being young and his ability to recover from that, as you've seen from like a lot of the reports and videos and stuff like that, hoping he comes back to form. But they really added to the receiver room, right? Like they're getting Jerry Jeudy here now, which is like really huge, I think, because he was kind of asked to be like more a receiver one in Denver, but now he kind of gets to
Yeah.
settle in behind Amari Cooper, which is great. And then we saw the emergence of David Njoku last season, so I think the playmakers are all set, and we saw that last year. Joe Flacco was able to distribute. We saw Amari Cooper have like a career game against Houston with Joe Flacco, so the playmakers are set in place. Cleveland always has a good offensive line, so the offense is really good. There's one really important factor here that needs to be addressed, and it's the quarterback situation. We saw Joe Flacco come in and look better than all the quarterbacks that came before him, and DTR, Deshaun, like just look better.
PJ Walker.
PJ Walker, like that's a problem, considering Deshaun Watson's contract, and now that he's the starting quarterback again, like we're into the third year of this, technically year 2.5, or honestly technically year 2, but still it was very rarely pretty when he was on the field. So that's the big question mark here, which that sucks considering how great the offensive line and great the receiving options are. The defense, had a phenomenal season last year, led by Myles Garrett, obviously. But you had breakouts from JOK. Zadarius Smith's getting up there in age, but still a really good player. The secondary honestly had some players that I think kind of took a step up, right? Like you have Greg Newsome and Martin Emerson. Like those are two really ascending cornerbacks. Denzel Ward has kind of had like two rough-ish seasons, but like you still kind of expect him to he's still like a good player, but like he's getting paid a lot of money. So yeah, that's something. But the secondary is still going to be a cohesive, good unit, I feel like, and they've got Grant Delpit back there. So it's a great defense too, and we mentioned that with all the statistics and things like that, like yards allowed and points and total stuff like that. But not really a whole lot of weaknesses on the defense. Just some players that might need to might need to prove that there's still solid players in this league, like Denzel Ward. But I think this is a great roster. It really just comes to, oh yeah, and they got Stefanski too. So like he's a phenomenal coach, 2-time Coach of the Year winner. Like they got everything in place to make a Super Bowl run. It's just like the quarterback, like
Exactly.
it's just really it's rough because and you think because like if they had the 2017 to 2020 Deshaun Watson, like yeah, this would be a Super Bowl favorite probably, but they don't have that Deshaun Watson, so that's
Yeah. And the worst part is Joe Flacco's not going to be able to save them this time because if Deshaun Watson somehow gets hurt or is ineffective, then the next backup quarterbacks are Jameis Winston and Tyler Huntley. Okay, guys, but you can't
yeah
really count on them to take you
no.
to the playoffs. You're going to have to rely on your defense to completely carry you. And in this NFL, it doesn't really work anymore.
I will say this though, Jameis Winston, if he had to come in, like it would be up and down, but if he could settle in here with Stefanski, I could see a situation where this works. Obviously not Super Bowl wise, but like I think we could see a similar scenario to last year if
Well,
Deshaun Watson is
Here's
benched.
why here's why I slightly disagree with that because last year the Browns led the league in turnovers and it actually cost them in the playoffs.
Right,
Jameis Winston, what was the biggest reason why the Tampa Bay Bucks moved on from him after 2019? 5,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, but 30 interceptions and a few fumbles lost. That's always been the stigma of his NFL play. There are moments where he shows you the potential he has and why he was a Heisman winning quarterback and a number one overall pick. Or not a high, I don't know if he was he a Heisman winner or was he a Heisman candidate?
oh, I don't know actually. I don't
I
know.
completely forgot. The point is he was up there. He was up there. The point is though, he showed you a lot of high moments, but then once he turned the ball over, it was like, all right, so this is why Jameis hasn't been able to get a starting job in a while. That's the only knock I have on him. But
Yeah.
anyways, I agree with the rest. I think, if you're Deshaun Watson, like, what the hell is going on? Obviously, what happened in the last 2 years, we don't have to go down that road because obviously there was a lot of baggage. And when you came back, you didn't look like yourself. You were average at best and you were shaky at your worst. And even though before you got hurt, you had that incredible second half against the Ravens where he didn't throw a single incompletion, but it's just been very up and down. And when you're getting paid this much money for 3 to 4 more seasons, that's even worse. And it's a biggest reason why it's going to go down as the worst contract handed out in NFL history. And it makes the Browns even worse for moving on from Baker Mayfield because even though he played through a shoulder injury, he at least has been a lot better in the last couple of seasons than Deshaun Watson has been. So that's the only thing that could hold the Browns back from making the playoffs again because they have the talent, they have an outstanding defense, they got the amount of playmakers on your offense, but if Deshaun Watson doesn't live up to the expectations that he's been given since that contract has been handed out, then that season is just going to be an outright failure, and the Browns are just going to be scrutinized for the decisions that they've made since then. So,
Well, yeah, I understand getting
or
rid of
leading up to that, I should say.
I understand getting rid of Baker. Like that I don't think that was a terrible decision. It's the way they operated it. Like you trade for Deshaun first, and then like I feel like if you were gonna go for a quarterback like revamp, like trade Baker and then try and get someone in the draft, or like maybe get a veteran as a bridge, like or honestly just keep Baker at that point. Like I
I
mean
know
I get that
Baker actually took them to the playoffs and helped them win a playoff game.
true, but the thing is Baker then went on to Carolina and he was not good.
Well,
So
who has been good in Carolina since Cam Newton?
good. I mean, fair. That's a good point. But
Seriously, like look how much of a travesty Bryce Young had to deal with, or the situation that he was put in.
that's true. No,
I
I
mean,
mean,
Sam Darnold flopped. Baker Mayfield, that obviously didn't work out. I mean, when your best quarterbacks in that entire span has been PJ Walker, there is a serious problem with your franchise. Him and Kyle Allen.
yeah, I mean, they really haven't
So,
had much success at all.
and Teddy Bridgewater. So
Yeah.
that should really tell you about everything. But let's get into it a little bit further. So here we go. just how bad has the Deshaun Watson contract been for this franchise? I think we already covered it enough, but I mean,
I
just how
mean,
bad has it been in your opinion?
there's not really. I mean, yeah, it's the worst deal in like sports history, right? It has to be. It's up there. I mean, it's not even the fact they gave it fully guaranteed and they giving it to a guy that hadn't played in 2 years. It's like you look at it in hindsight, and he's been like not playable. Like when you think about it, like he hasn't even been like he's been like yeah he's been like Nick Mullins esque. Like I think if you put Nick Mullins in there, like it's pretty much the same result. Like a lot, like you saw
Wow,
it. Joe, I mean, dude, he has been so bad. Like it's not
he
even.
has.
I mean, it's really presents some issues for the Browns, and I think. Yeah, I think if you put like any backup in there, they're pretty much performing the same with this roster because I think this roster is loaded. It's just they don't. The quarterback is like just they don't have one, and they have to pay the existing one too. Like, because really, do you think there's a huge difference between Jameis Winston and Deshaun Watson right now? I really don't. So, and the funny thing is, they're paying Jameis like $4 million, and Deshaun's getting 250 guaranteed.
I
So,
mean, if you were asking this question in 2019, I think that question
well,
would be
yeah,
laughable. And
obviously, but
now at this point, it's like, yeah,
yeah,
not
it's
really.
not a huge difference. So, but the thing is, if you're paying a guy that like 250 million more guaranteed, like you're gonna play that guy, obviously. So they really don't have a choice here, which is, I think, the hardest part. Like I'd much rather be in a position where like you just can't find the right guy and you're consistently like going because at least you can proactively do something about it. Both are terrible situations, but like this one sucks because you are literally stuck. Like you
I
can't do
know.
anything about it. So
Unless you want to eat hundreds of millions of dollars of dead money.
which like at that point you should just have like a really expensive backup, and they're stuck in this situation for a few more years, but
I
there's
know.
always
And
ways to work around it.
it's their own damn fault for it. It's their own
Yeah,
damn fault. But let's get to the other side of things, which has been the biggest bright spot. Obviously, the leader of it all, Myles Garrett, won his first Defensive Player of the Year award. It's about damn time. Do you think that he will win back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year awards this season?
I don't see why not. I think the only thing stopping him probably is a lot of good edge rushers in this league, and also they never they never love to give these awards back to back. I've noticed in the NFL, the NBA they do it all the time, but there's so much
Mm-hmm.
repetition bias in the NFL honors. They don't want to give it to. I mean, we saw that with Aaron Rodgers in the COVID year. Like he won it in 2020 and then 2021. Like they really did not want to give it to him, especially considering all his like his status and things like that. But they had no choice. So that's the only thing that might be holding him back. But I mean, how can you say they're like he can't do it? I mean, he's one of the three most. I mean, you could make an argument he's one of the best just pure players in the league if you just take it on a like a value standpoint. I mean, he's like one of the most important positions, like him, Mahomes, and like again, like him and Mahomes are like two of the most impactful players in this entire league. Just because, like
Tyreek Hill, that's a good
yeah,
one.
Tyreek Hill. I mean, yeah, like I think up like we saw the players think the same way. He was up there in the top 100 list. Not that that means everything, but I think
I mean, it shows how much respect you have amongst your peers.
right,
That's for damn
exactly.
sure.
No, 100%. But I think you just see like what this is a good defensive unit, but like he is the reason they were like were first for that. Like they were on a historic pace at the beginning of the season. Then they played some good quarterbacks. The statistics kind of went down, but the real reason they're always in it, like you see him, he is always making an impact. And his sack numbers went down towards the end of the season. That's because he got triple
Yeah.
and quadruple teamed. So it's hard, but he's consistently getting pressure to the quarterback. Like he is like, in my opinion, I think he's the best defender in the league. I think you can make an argument for Micah, maybe Sauce, TJ Watt, but like Myles Garrett is like the cream of the crop, like one of the best edge rushers
Yeah.
in the past few decades, and also just at a historic level right now. So yeah, I think it's 100% possible.
Yeah, that's fair, and I hope that he can. I mean, I don't know if it will, just because you've got guys like T.J. Watt, who's also trying to win a second Defensive Player of the Year award. Micah Parsons is hoping to get his first under the belt. So, I mean, he's in a very elite class. Even Max Crosby, he is definitely very
Yeah,
well alive in that conversation. And to be honest, I mean, this isn't really too much of a hot take, but winning Defensive Player of the Year in the NFL is like incredible. It's like 10 times harder than winning that same award in the NBA because, I mean, really, you see Rudy Gobert win 4 of them. Well, that's
Yeah,
because anytime you try laying the ball up and he's at the rim, yeah, he's gonna block it because he's 7 foot. Yet you
right,
see him in the playoffs and you see him get switched on to shooters and they go through the hoop. It's like, all right, well, he's good, but is he that good? And when you
yeah,
see
that's a good
NFL
point.
Defensive Player of the Year awards, they're almost unguardable, and you have to like pray for you to actually have a good day against him.
Right.
So it's a very good point there. Um, yeah, I think Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Micah Parsons, Max Crosby, those are really the top 4 guys. And obviously, I'm not thinking of, obviously, there's some that I'm definitely not thinking of right now, but they'll
Breakouts too.
probably come along. Yeah, they'll have breakouts along the way. So we'll see what happens. But another, headline that's been circulating around the Browns has been the Brandon Ayuk situation. And I think it's time that we talk about it here right now because obviously, Brandon Ayuk has been asking for a trade for a long time now because he hasn't been getting the contract that he wants. And, you know, just last week, 2 teams have laid out the frameworks for the Browns or for the 49ers. And San Francisco is willing to take one of those deals as long as Brandon Ayuk chooses which team he wants to go to. The 2 teams involved were the New England Patriots and the Cleveland Browns. And the Patriots offered him the most amount of money, and Brandon Ayuk said he didn't want to go there, which, kind of bummed me out a little bit, but at the same time, it looks worse on his part than it does on the Patriots' part,
Oh
or
yeah.
even on the 49ers' part, because at this point, they're just like, all right, what the hell do you want at this point? Do you want to win or do you want the money? Because when it comes to these, if you wanted the most money, he would have accepted the deal with New England and he would have been there by now. But eventually, apparently, that was not the case. But the Cleveland Browns were willing to offer a few draft picks and Amari Cooper if they were to get Brandon Ayuk, which was pretty interesting. I think the 49ers definitely would have loved to have Amari Cooper, and it would have looked just as well with him on their roster. But do you really think that Brandon Ayuk would have been the difference maker if he was traded to the Cleveland Browns?
Well, if you look at it in a vacuum, yeah, obviously. I mean, Brandon Ayuk is phenomenal. We've talked about that a lot. But you also have to think about what you have to give up, the amount of money you have to pay him. I just don't think Cleveland. That's the last thing Cleveland needs to do right now.
Exactly.
With Cooper, with Njoku, with Chubb, like they don't need Ayuk. They can, and like all the draft picks, and you're already paying the shot. Like no, this is not where that
Exactly.
team needed to go in this direction. Obviously, if he was just there, like you're looking at it standalone, like if he was in that offense, yeah, like I think the Browns would obviously sign up for that. But you got to think about the opportunity, like the cost of it. Like you're paying how much money, the draft picks you have to give up when you already don't have a ton of draft picks. Like they gotta be smart about where they're allocating their resources. So if they had a rookie quarterback, I'd be like, hell yeah, go all freaking in, like 100%. But I think they're in a good spot with their receiving core. And side note, Ayuk, I ultimately think he figures it out with the Niners. I really don't think he gets traded, but that's a conversation for a different day. But I mean, if they were to make this trade, they really would have been given Deshaun absolutely no excuses. Even
Of
if
course.
Ayuk or Cooper got hurt, you still have Judy and other receivers that can make an impact. So yeah, that would have been something, I think.
Yeah, I think the Browns offense would have been a little bit more dynamic just because of the age that he's at. But if we had like a legitimate quarterback with the amount of hype that surrounds CJ Stroud or Jordan Love or Justin Herbert or even Patrick Mahomes and Burrow and Lamar,
Yeah.
then it would have been a slam dunk. But to your point, the Browns are already dealing with enough. You've got the Deshaun Watson contract, Nick Chubb is injured, and it's just
They got some things to sort
really at some point in time, like you have a lot to work on, and I think you don't need Brandon Ayuk at this point because you actually have to see what type of direction your franchise is going to go in at this point. You're still in that stage where you could be a worthy playoff contender because you have an elite defense and a hell of a coach and a talented offense, but there are bigger things that they have to fix on their roster for sure. And I don't know if Brandon Ayuk would have been the biggest need. It would have been a plus, but at the same time, it's like, how much is it going to really benefit them in the long run?
Yeah.
So I agree with you there. But I think it's time we move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers, the team that is still yet to have a losing record since 2003. So I think it's about time that we head into this. Um, yeah, the Pittsburgh Steelers again, once again backing into the playoffs as a seventh seed, only to get destroyed in the wild card round. At least Mason Rudolph did whatever he could to put up a good fight, but at the same time, we already knew what was going to happen. They were going up against a way better football team, and once again, the Steelers just got overmatched. And heading into this season, you made changes, but at the same time, have you really elevated yourselves to that point? I understand that they signed Russell Wilson and that they traded for Justin Fields, but really, you're in like the lowest risk situation with your quarterbacks. If they suck, then you can move on from them and you will have no financial consequences whatsoever. And if one of those two work out, then you'll actually head yourselves into a reasonable situation because you don't have to deal with the stench of Matt Canada anymore. Arthur Smith, for the amount of flaws that he's had as a head coach, is still a respectable offensive mind and a solid play caller. He's a guy that loves to run the ball. He loves opening up the passing game with play action. He's pretty much predicates himself on having, a balanced approach, or not a balanced approach, but, he doesn't really pride himself on pushing it too far down the field. You just want to make sure that you go on long drives and that you can wear the defense out, over the course of a game. And with this type of roster, it could work, but I think you need everything to go right. Obviously, you have a solid running back tandem of Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. You got an elite playmaker like George Pickens. You got a solid tight end and Pat Freiermuth. But at the same time, your wide receiver depth is not that great right now. I mean, you drafted Roman Wilson, but the next best veteran receivers are Van Jefferson, Tez Fitzpatrick, and Scotty Miller. So unless Scotty Miller or unless Russell Wilson turns back into 2015 and just looks like a legit MVP candidate, then I don't really see this offense being better than a top 15 unit, if you really ask me. Him and Justin Fields, because you see that they still have a lot of football left in them, but it's just really more limitations than anything. And especially with an offensive line that just hasn't really been up to par in the last few seasons. Obviously, they drafted Broderick Jones last year and Troy Fatana in the past first draft in the first round. But yeah, it's okay. But like I said, it's not going to really elevate into a top 10 unit unless these quarterbacks really overachieve. But one thing I will not be concerned about is their defense, because you still have TJ Watt, you have Alex Highsmith, you signed Patrick Queen, your secondary is elite with Joey Porter Jr. and Minka Fitzpatrick. You have a lot of guys that can attack the pocket. You have guys that can shut down the run. You have guys that can slow down the passing game on all three levels. And really, you got Mike Tomlin as your head coach. He's a guy that's not going to let his team have a record below 500. They'll be lucky to make the playoffs. That's if Russell Wilson doesn't completely suck the way he did in Denver. And if Justin Fields actually shows the potential that he had as to why he was a first-round pick. But to me, I feel like the Steelers are just going to be another average team this season. You know they have a lot of key playmakers that could definitely win you games, but consistency is really the key here, and I just don't know if the Steelers have enough to really do that.
Yeah, I think with the Steelers it's tough because they really are never going to be bad enough to get a really high quarterback. So
Exactly.
I think I understand. I love both the moves. Not that I think Russell Wilson just feels are great, but I love the low risk on it. Like Russell Wilson's going to be your what you're getting type of guy. Like what you're getting with Russell Wilson at this point. Like he's not going to lose you games, or he's not going to win them for you. And then Justin Fields is the high upside. Like if it goes in the tank with Russell Wilson, like can this be Justin Fields' last shot? And so I kind of like what they did with that approach. Honestly, like I think they kind of did Kenny Pickett a little dirty, but with Kenny Pickett, like you kind of again knew what you were having there. But I don't.
Exactly.
Kenny Pickett gets a lot of heat. I really don't think he was that bad here.
No, he wasn't. I mean, he was okay at best. That's what I would give him.
Honestly,
he's shown you that he can pull off game-winning drives when you least expect it.
Yeah, like I think you'll kind of get a similar level of play with Russell Wilson. I think you'll get a little bit better, but with Justin Fields, you're really just banking on the athleticism and all that stuff. Sorry, there's something in my eye, but
No, you're good.
yeah, I think you nailed it though, because I think the Steelers, yeah, they're a very average team, and I think that starts with the quarterback. Like, not a terrible quarterback situation. Russell Wilson, you know, not horrendous as he's not like a backup, but
Yeah.
nothing
And
crazy you're getting with
and
Russell Wilson.
also, even if you still had Deontay Johnson, I don't really think anything would have changed too dramatically just because of the quarterback situation you were presenting yourself with. And I agree with you about Kenny Pickett. Yeah, he's got injury concerns and physical limitations, but at the same time, he's at least been decent enough to help you win some games along the way. He might not be the best, or he might not be like a first round level quarterback, but he's not that much different than what you have right now, to your point.
Yeah, so I don't really think they got like that much better or worse at quarterback. It's just there's definitely some potential there, especially when you have two of them too. But I think Russ is definitely the clear starter here, and I think he kind of just like embodies the rest of the roster. Like it's like an average, like typical 9-8 team what we've seen from the Steelers the last few
Yeah,
years.
well, that was actually the question I wanted to ask. Do you think that Mike Tomlin will continue a streak of winning record seasons of winning seasons?
Yeah, I do, because I think this team will probably win exactly 9 games again. I
Yeah,
mean, if
me
they
too.
don't continue that streak, they'll probably win 7 or 8, because this isn't a bad roster. So I really don't see them getting, unless
Right.
injuries happen. Like, I really don't see them getting under 6 wins. Um. So yeah,
I
I
don't,
would
they need something really horrible along the
yeah
way to happen for them to reach that point.
I would say yeah. I think he does, but barely. Like, I don't think this team is winning more than 10. So, but yeah, I don't know what their over under is on wins. I'd probably bet the
It's
over, because
probably 9.
it's because I don't think it. I think they're getting kind of overlooked just because of their quarterback, and not really a lot of dynamic playmakers on the defense or offense. But they're well coached, and they've got competent players. So, and especially when you got TJ Watt, like, who we'll talk about. But yeah, I think this team could continue the streak, which honestly isn't even a good thing. Like, do they really want that? Like, yeah, you'll win 9 games, you'll get in the playoffs, and you'll get
Yeah,
curb
but it's
stomped by
just
the
it's all
Chiefs and
about
Bills.
complacency. It's about
Oh, or the
complacency because the
Bengals.
more that you reach that point, the more that you think, "Oh, we don't really need to make any changes. We could just stick to what we have, make a few minor touches along the way, but we don't really have to overhaul anything because
Right.
we're in a decent spot." But at the same time, bottoming out and tanking, or not really tanking, but reaching that bottom point actually could help you grow along the way because it allows you to get those elite playmakers in the draft, and it allows you to actually get better along the way and reemerge yourselves as a respectable team in a few years. Because yeah, you might have been at your lowest, but with the right amount of drafting and with the right players around and the right coaches to help you develop, then yeah, you'll be in a way better situation than you're in right now because complacency is just accepting mediocrity. That's it.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So I think we got that out of the way. Uh, let's actually stick. Let's get back to the Brandon Ayuk conversation because apparently the Pittsburgh Steelers were like one of the biggest teams that really wanted to get Brandon Ayuk. Obviously, like I said, they need a lot of help at receiver because even though you have George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth, you don't really have any other guys that can create that separation and open up the field for everybody else. So, do you think that they should continue to go after Ayuk or just stick to what they have?
See, like, this, I feel like would be the best spot for him. Um, Obviously, it just depends on what they'd have to give up. But I feel like this is the spot that makes the most sense. I never really understood um, Cleveland. I wouldn't love New England just because of the money they'd have to give up, and I think they should continue to build to the draft. But this one makes the most sense. So yeah, I think if any team should try and pay up or give up the most amount of assets, I think it should be the Steelers. So if there any team I would put under this label, I think it'd be the Steelers. So yeah, I would say why not? I mean, they've got Pickens, who I like. I don't know if he's ever going to be like a alpha true number one. He's really good too, but like, is he like the guy? Like, I don't know. I'm not saying he's not. I just don't know. I still need to see some more from him. He's been consistent. It's just he hasn't been like a CeeDee Lamb, Jefferson, that type. So yeah, I think if you have him, because you really need that route running back after losing Deontay Johnson, who's one of the best route runners in the league, and so is Brandon Ayuk. So that would be a pretty damn good replacement for Deontay Johnson. So I think that'd be quite a move if the Steelers were able to pull that off. I don't know. I still think Brandon Ayuk stays in San Fran, but I would kind of love that fit here. Because and Russ would be able to get him the ball. Like Russ isn't great anymore, but like he doesn't stink so bad that he wouldn't be able to get the ball in his playmaker's hand. Like we saw that with Cortland Sutton last year. Like he'll be able to get the ball to Brandon Ayuk. So
yeah, I think if it were up to Brandon Ayuk, he'd want to go to Washington because obviously Jaden Daniels is his best friend. But the Commanders already have enough wide receivers that are good enough to actually have starting jobs, so they don't really need Ayuk at this point. But I mean, if you were to get traded away from San Francisco, then yeah, I think Pittsburgh would make the most sense. I don't know how it's going to work between him and Pickens because both of them are going to want to be the number one option. But I think, if there's a destination that does make sense, then it would be Pittsburgh just because they need more help around Pickens and around their quarterbacks. So I agree with you there. And then let's get to this last question before we get to the Bengals because I want to save some time here. TJ Watt. Do you think he gets another Defensive Player of the Year award this year, or is it going to be another while before he gets to that point?
I mean, yeah, it's the same thing with Garrett. Like, I don't see why not. I mean, there's always going to be a rivalry between them. There's like the conversation between TJ Watt and Garrett, but at the end of the day, they're two of the best edge rushers in the league. So, I don't know what the odds are, but he should definitely be up there. And I wouldn't be surprised if he does win one because if I had to predict who's going to get it, I honestly think we're going to see someone interesting this year, just because of how the NFL works with parity and things like that. Like, not the same player doesn't always win it, but these guys are always going to be the favorites for the next 3 to 4 years when they're at their prime. So
yeah, Christian Gonzalez season, baby, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, hey, wouldn't be surprised after the rookie season he started out with last year before getting hurt. So
yeah,
you never know.
I mean, you never know. I mean, nobody expected Bob Sanders to win a Defensive Player of the Year award when he did it.
Right.
It ended up happening.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's move on to Cincinnati because it's actually pretty crazy how they finished last place in their division, even with I mean, last year wasn't a terrible year for them. It was chaotic, and it was a bit frustrating just because of Joe Burrow's injury history. But, I mean, with Jake Browning, they did a decent enough job. They just couldn't pull it down, and they just couldn't finish the job in the end. So, TJ, the floor is yours. How scared should we be about the Bengals?
I think it's kind of a side note, not really, but with Jake Browning, like, I think he's kind of getting – I don't think some people realize how well he played last season in the limited time he had. He was playing well for this team. So that's kind of what led to their 9-8 record. But as a whole, like with Joe Burrow, like this team is going to be, that there's not a debate. Like Burrow is, a top 5 quarterback, debatably top 3. Like if you really, it depends on how you have it. But either way, one of the best quarterbacks in football. So the Bengals are always going to be competitive. That's why, spoiler, I think it's between them and the Ravens to win this division. I don't really think that's a shocking.
That's not really much of a hot take.
So yeah, I think ultimately when you have that, like, you're going to be good for a while. The thing with the Bengals though is like their receiving core, obviously with Jamar Chase and T Higgins, is really what I think is going to allow them to make the deep playoff run yet again. If that happens, I think it's going to be attributed to that. And like with T Higgins, he didn't have the best season last year, dealt with some injuries, but I still think he's, as a number 2, he's still a really good player. But Jamar Chase, I mean, he is like, he's waiting to get paid, but him and Joe Burrow have this elite connection, and that's going to blast for as long as they're here. So, not really much to say about the quarterback and receiving room. They traded essentially Joe Mixon for Zach Moss. I don't really know. I don't know if there's a huge difference between there.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't even know if he's going to be their starter either because you got Chase Brown.
Chase Brown's a really good player too. Yeah. So they've got I like their running back core with Chase Brown. And they got Williams and Moss. So I like what they're doing there. Offensive line is always going to be a question mark with this team, but drafting Marius Mims could prove to be a really solid play for them. So Love the offense, just led by Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. It should be great, but their defense is super underrated. They've got guys but the thing with their defense, they don't have like a Myles Garrett. Trey Hendrickson's probably the closest guy. He's not. But he's been really consistent for the past 3 years he's been with the Bengals. But they've just got so many good role players. Like you got B.J. Hill, Logan Wilson was probably even more than he's probably not really in that classification of a role player. He's like even better. Cam Taylor-Britt, one of the most underrated secondary players in the league, like super good. And then you had Geno Stone, who had a lot of interceptions last year, was solid for the Ravens, and you've got good guys in the secondary. You got Von Bell, who's been there a ton. And I think the biggest thing with this is like outside of the Trey Hendrickson and BJ Hill, like the defensive line, like Hubbard's good, but they kind of need some depth there. They drafted Miles Murphy 2 years ago, but overall, I mean, this defense is a really solid. And honestly, I mean, it was rough. It had some rough games last year, and it didn't like ultimately rank very well. But I think, a lot of injuries last year, just a lot of weird things for the Bengals. But ultimately, I think this defense could prove to be better than it was last year because it had some bad showings. But we saw 2 years ago in their playoff run, like a lot of these guys were here and they played pretty well. So in that playoff run, the 2022 one. So yeah, I love this Bengals roster. I just think it's overall so well-rounded. And when you have a guy like Joe Burrow, like, it's going to, if everyone stays healthy, I think they're going to make a deep playoff run. So,
yeah. And I think, and we'll talk about this later on, but I think they're still going to be the biggest threat to the Kansas City Chiefs because Joe Burrow is the only active quarterback that has beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. So as long as Joe Burrow is fully healthy, you're still going to be in it for the long run no matter what. And I agree with everything that you said. I mean, yeah, the receiving core definitely looks different, or the offense looks a bit different without Joe Mixon and Tyler Boyd. But, I mean, still have Jamar. You still have T. Higgins. You got a couple of rising stars in Andre Yushivas and Trenton Irwin. You drafted Jermaine Burton. Chase Brown is, developing into a pretty strong running back. And, yeah, the O-line has always had question marks almost every single season, but at least they're trying to make moves to make sure that it stays better. I mean, you drafted Amarius Mims. They signed Trent Brown. They still have Orlando Brown. And, you kept most of your starters there, including Alex Kappa and Ted Karras. So as long as Joe Burrow is fully healthy, they're going to be the biggest reason why they're a Super Bowl contender. Defense, I mean, listen, for the last few seasons under Lou Anarumo, it's been a pretty solid unit. I wouldn't say an elite one, but I'd say it's about, top 10, top 15. And Trey Hendrickson has been the biggest reason for it. Their linebacking core has been the second. And the secondary has always been opportunistic. This year, I feel like it's that group that might be the weakest link to me because obviously you brought up Cam Taylor-Britt and Geno Stone. But at the same time, I feel like the depth is not as strong as it used to be. And I think that it could potentially bite them in the butt if they don't develop into the players that Cincinnati expects. Because you got guys like, I mean, even though you signed Von Bellbeck, you have Jordan Battle, you have DJ Ivy, you got DJ Turner, and they gave up a lot of pretty high passer ratings last year. So really, that's the one thing that concerns me. But I agree with everything else. They're going to be in the AFC Championship picture. They're going to be in the playoffs if they're fully healthy because obviously – that's been the one itch when it comes to Joe Burrow because that he's just a killer and a dog every time he steps on the field. But when he's off of it and when he can't play, then the Bengals are a way different team, even with Jake Browning having the strong stretch that he had. So we'll see what happens. But I will say this. How scared should we be about Joe Burrow returning? I said this to start your take, but is it going to be like a Tom Brady return, or do we just have to wait and see? Is it one of those scenarios?
Well, I think it's like when we talk about the Ravens, like it could, you can make a deep playoff run, but it's ultimately how they fare against the Chiefs, right? Like but again, he's been the closest guy. And even when he lost in 22, 23, like he wasn't too far off, right? Like, it's not like he got smoked. Like they were close. So
yeah.
I think the league should be scared. Yeah, I think ultimately What's in the way is health. Because, like, even I mean, Joe Burrow definitely didn't play well last year. He wasn't awful, but like to start, but that was because of the injury. So yeah, I think it is health. If he's back fully healthy, like we know Joe Burrow can. Joe Burrow, I mean, you can make the argument he is like the second or third or fourth best quarterback. I mean, he is definitely a top four in my opinion, but um, he rivals Lamar, he rivals Josh, and he comes close to Mahomes, right? Like, I mean, there's been some. He's not as good in terms of playoff success, obviously, but like he's he's always gonna he's always gonna be the reason you're winning games. Is essentially what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I think the league should be scared.
I do too. I don't think they should be scared. I think they should be terrified because if you saw the haircut that he had at the start of training camp, yeah, the song "Without You," the Shady's back, tell a friend. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
taking that to another level. He says, "All right, if you don't really think the same player I am, just watch out because I'm back, and you're gonna wish that you don't have to see me in the playoffs." And that's a message even sent to Patrick Mahomes because it's a 1-1 playoff record between the two. Burrow's
Yeah.
got in him three years ago. Mahomes got him back the next year, and last year we didn't really get to see it play out. But yeah,
Right.
this we should be terrified, for Joe Burrow because we know what he can do on the field. You know, he reads defenses so well. He might not be the most athletic quarterback, but he's not afraid to get out of the pocket and use his legs, even with that terrible offensive line that he's had all those years. And anytime you try to put him down to the ground, he's going to find a way to get right back up, and he's going to hurt you when you least expect it. And
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes is the only other player that I think can do that. So it really comes down to those two. And I don't really even need to ask the question if they're the biggest threat to the Chiefs because they obviously are. But let's
Yep.
talk about Jamar Chase here because he held out a training camp. He wants a new contract. I don't even know why he's holding out because I feel like the Bengals are going to give it to him. I think it's pretty obvious. He's been their best receiver since he's arrived, and he's just one of the top 5 wideouts in the game. But at some point in time, like, when do you think it's going to end? Because, I mean, I don't know if Cincinnati can afford this holdout anymore, and I don't even think Jamar Chase can deal with it, since he's still on his rookie contract.
Well, I mean, it'll end by the end of the season, but I think it's him holding out. I mean, obviously, very common amongst receivers or against any player, but
Or holding in, you show up to
yeah,
camp, but you're not practicing.
right. I mean, I think it's really just an injury thing, right? Like you don't want to get injured, and then
Oh, of course. I
so
get that.
I get why it's happening, obviously, but yeah, they're gonna give him his money, and I think it's gonna be. I mean, they did the same thing to Burrow, like literally. I think they did it like right before the first game of the season. So I think
it was around this time.
yeah,
Or actually, yeah, it was literally on the opening night they gave him
right.
that deal.
Yeah, so I think something similar to Chase. They'll get it done, and I think it's very different than the CD Lamb one because that one is getting kind of crazy, which we'll talk about
Yeah.
another day. But I think this one is going to end up being more civilized, just because they both know it's going to get done. So
Yeah, the CeeDee Lamb situation, it's just I
yeah,
mean,
it's a little
the
tough.
Cowboys are already in panic, but they always wait till like the very last minute to give them the deal. It's like
Yeah,
the week before the season starts. I mean, they did that with Zeke, they did that with Dak, and it's probably going to happen with him and even Michael Parsons. Whenever he decides to ask for more money, which
right.
he's eventually going to get because Michael Parsons is pretty much has been their best player, arguably. I mean, obviously Dak and CD are right up there, but Micah's just had such an immediate impact. But that's another subject we'll talk about another day. Let's head to the final stretch of this show, which is just the 4 favorite questions that we love to answer. Starting with number 1, which team has the best offense and which has the best defense? I'll start. I think the offense is really tough because
It is
you
tough.
got a 2-time MVP in Lamar Jackson, and then with the Bengals, you have Joe Burrow and just a lot of elite playmakers. So this is really tough, but I mean, listen, if you're talking about individual wise, I think it's Lamar or the Baltimore Ravens just because you have the 2-time MVP. But the Bengals have been to 2 conference championships. They went to a Super Bowl with a good majority of those same players that are on the roster right now. I think continuity wise, you got to go with the Cincinnati Bengals. And I know it sounds ludicrous because, again, Lamar has the 2 MVPs, but it really just comes down to chemistry and experience and efficiency. And I think the Bengals just have had more success in those three areas than the Baltimore Ravens. It may have gotten Lamar Jackson individual accolades, but that has nothing to do with how far you go as a team when it really matters most.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but defense-wise, it's also tough too because the Ravens led the league in sacks last year. The Browns gave up the fewest yards. The Steelers are always a top 10 to 15 unit as long as they have Mike Tomlin and TJ Watt. And the Bengals have always been pretty underrated, like you just said. So, I mean, this is really tough. I'll probably go with the Brown. I don't know. This is really tough because, it's kind of a similar situation with the Ravens and the Browns. Cleveland has Myles Garrett, a defensive player of the year, but, you saw the Ravens just how successful they were last year in the playoffs. Even though they lost to the Chiefs, they still did everything they could to win them the game. So, I don't really know. I'll probably go with the Browns, and I know it's a little hypocritical just given what I said about, Lamar Jackson, but not only do you still have Myles Garrett, but Jim Schwartz has been a more proven defensive coordinator. You have more continuity and chemistry than the Ravens defense does. And again, even though they got destroyed in the wild card last year against the Houston Texans, they still were the biggest reason and the driving force to their playoff trip last year. If they actually had a legitimate quarterback, who knows how better they would have been. So, yeah, I'd probably say Cleveland has the best defense. But again, I wouldn't be shocked if another team was thrown in the mix. And I wouldn't fight them on that because there are a lot of great teams in this division.
Yeah, for defense, I'd probably go Cleveland too for all the points you mentioned, like having Myles Garrett and more, I guess more continuity on the defensive side with their coaching and overall personnel. So yeah, I'd probably go Cleveland for defense. Offense, I think I'd go Bengals too, and the sole reason is because I think the receiving core is the receiving core, and just ultimately the can't even say the consistency with Joe Burrow, but I think really we've seen them get to a Super Bowl, the similar unit, and I think the receiving core is the ultimate, because there's some questions with the Ravens receiving core. So
right,
I think with Cincinnati's receiving core, I think that's ultimately the biggest difference there. So I'd go Cincinnati. It's close between Cincinnati and Baltimore, though. So especially with the addition of Derrick Henry, like you can make an argument for either one. I'll go Cincy though, but Cleveland, I'm definitely going with best defense. So
all right, let's rank these head coaches because all four of them are incredibly have been phenomenal, with their respective organizations. Because you got a two-time Coach of the Year award, 2 Super Bowl champions, and another guy that's taken his team to that point. So I'll let you go first here.
This is a tough one. They're all good. So it's like, how do you even? I think you have to go Zach Taylor at 4. But I think Zach Taylor's a great coach, which sucks. But I'm gonna go Zach Taylor at 4. I'll go Stefanski at 3, which is crazy to say because Stefanski's really good too.
Yeah.
Tomlin at 2, and then Harbaugh at 1. I feel like that's gotta be my list, because with Taylor, yeah, great. But like I think with Stefanski, he's done it with less. And
That's
then
true.
Tomlin, just the longevity, you got to put him at 2, and Harbaugh's the consistently the best one. So I go, yeah, Harbaugh 1, Tomlin 2, Stefanski 3, and Taylor 4.
Well, I agree with 3 and 4 because even though Taylor has gotten his team to the Super Bowl, Kevin Stefanski has won more with less. When he went to the playoffs his first year, that was with Baker Mayfield, who ended up getting traded 2 years later. And for as well as Baker Mayfield has done in Tampa now, at that point, Stefanski was credited with the successful development of that former number 1 overall pick that Hugh Jackson and Freddie Kitchens failed to do. And in his second Coach of the Year, you had Deshaun Watson go down. You had to deal with Dorian Thompson-Robinson and P.J. Walker. And it took a 39-year-old coming off the couch for you to actually get back to the playoffs. So I give Kevin Stefanski high regards for that. I have to flip Tomlin and Harbaugh around for mine because, yeah,
Really?
Tomlin has been pretty mediocre over the last few seasons. I totally get that. And Harbaugh has had, Lamar Jackson win 2 MVPs under his tenure. I totally get that. But Tomlin has yet to have a losing season in his entire tenure as the head coach. And granted, a lot of his peak was when, they had, future Hall of Famers on their roster. And at this point, the only one you could legitimately say is TJ Watt. But at the same time, year in and year out, with all the shuffled quarterbacks, even in 2019, when Ben Roethlisberger went down and they were forced to start Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges, they still went 8-8. And they made the playoffs with freaking Mason Rudolph last year. Like, that's pretty impressive in and of itself. And it's kind of similar to the Stefanski and Taylor point. Yeah, Harbaugh's had more success, but Tomlin's been able to win more with less than John Harbaugh has. And that's no knock on Harbaugh. He's a hell of a coach. And with the exception of 2015, where all of his best players went down, and in 2021 when Lamar Jackson got hurt, I mean, when they had losing seasons, it's just Tomlin's just had more success with way worse players. I shouldn't say way worse, but not to the pedigree that John Harbaugh has been fortunate to have. So that's just me.
I mean, I think those are all valid, I'd say.
Yeah, but again, if you want to put Harbaugh over Tomlin, I wouldn't fight you on that because they're both great coaches and they're going to get their jackets in cannon, I think. Maybe not first ballot right away, but I mean, eventually. That's what I'll say. And then last but not least, before we get to what we really want to get to, who has the best fan base and who falls right behind them? I think I'll start with this one. I think the Steelers are number one just because they're in every single stadium that you go to. And maybe that's because, in the 70s and 80s, everyone left Pittsburgh during the steel crisis and they went across the country. They pretty much moved to better environments with better working jobs, with better conditions, and, to give the better lives for their families. I totally get that. But I mean, in every football game you go to, you're going to see Steelers fans there. There's a whole wave of black and gold fans in any section in any stadium. And I don't think there are any other fan bases like it. Obviously, you see teams like the Chiefs and the Packers and the Bills, but I mean, the Steelers are the most rampant, and they are, I mean, listen, they might be annoying, but at least they can back it up just because they haven't had a losing season in who knows how long. But I think number two is complicated. I have to go with the Browns just because with how dedicated they've been, even with all the suffering that they've gone through over the past 30 seasons, with the 0-16 year, the 1-15 the year before that with Hugh Jackson. I mean, Freddie Kitchens. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, just the fact that they've still been there just says it all when it comes to the Browns. Yeah. And then three, I'd probably go with – this is a tough one because, I mean, the Ravens and Bengals are pretty quiet fan bases. They don't talk too much, and they're not as loyal as Pittsburgh and Cleveland, so that is a pretty hard one there. But I'd probably go with the Ravens 3 and the Bengals 4 just because Baltimore has had – more success in their history than Cincinnati. So that's what I'll say.
I think that'd be my list too. I was going to go, Steelers 1, obviously, for historic franchise, historic fans, and then passionate fans, and then Cleveland for what the stuff they've all been through, and then, Baltimore's pretty passionate too. They're all passionate fan bases, so they're, again, similar to the coaches. Like, they're all pretty highly regarded, but, I'd do the exact same list you said. That was the one I had in my mind as well.
All right. Finally, we really get to what we've all been waiting for. Who's winning this division? Who's second? Who's third? And who will be last place?
All right, so in fourth place, I think it's going to be the Cleveland Browns. Really just, with this quarterback situation, like I can't get on board with it. I think, they have all, like, you can make an argument if you're doing just rosters, like overall rosters, they could make an argument for one of the best in the division. Just with the playmakers, they have the defenses, but we talked about it in the past few episodes when like you don't have a quarterback, like it could be the downfall for it will be the downfall for your team. So they might scrap some games. I honestly think every team in this division again will have a winning record, or at least close to. So I could still see them winning 8 games, but yeah, I think they're last. Steelers not too far ahead or not too far up. I
Okay.
think similar to the Browns, but if Russell Wilson stays healthy, I trust him more than Deshaun. Not saying much, but and Tomlin with his ability to just always squeak out 9-8 records, I think that is something. And 1-2 is where it gets interesting. I, I think at 2, just because there's again parity in this league is like what you think is going to happen doesn't always happen. So I think I'm going to put the Ravens at 2. There's also another reason for this as well.
Ooh. All
Ravens
right.
have Ravens have the first place schedule. The Bengals have the last place schedule. That's something to consider as well. Ravens competition they have to play is much harder than the Bengals competition they have to play, especially considering
That's true.
the Joe Burrow injury, like that led them all the way. And the Bengals still had 9-8 record, but they still had the last spot in the division. And again, it's kind of the reason why I'm took the Bengals offense over the Ravens offense. I think the Ravens have this weird tendency where they have a really good season and then they kind of regress back a little bit and then they so it's really just the inconsistencies year to year with the Ravens. And I think this is really the Bengals year just to like they're tired of having all these injuries and they want to get back to that Super Bowl. I mean, every team does, but I feel like with Jamar back with Joe Burrow back throwing to these receivers, their defense will be a lot better. Yeah, I think they're due. I think the Bengals are due. And again, I think it's going to be like Bengals and Ravens are within 1 win of each other, and then the Steelers and Browns are with 1 win. So if you want to flip them, but I think 1 and 2 is either the Ravens and Bengals, and 3 and 4 is either the Steelers or Browns. I think that's the big thing. But so I'm picking at straws essentially for who I'm having ahead. But I'll go Bengals, Ravens, Steelers, Browns. So yeah.
My list is pretty much flipped around because at last place I have the Steelers because I don't really think they got any better than they did last year, nor did I think they got worse, which is
Right.
pretty much what you expect from the Steelers. It's just going to be mediocrity because, I mean, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields at this point in their careers haven't done enough to let you know, oh, yeah, this team is going to be a 10 and 11 wins team that they're going to have 10 11 wins and they're going to completely be the biggest threat to Baltimore or to Cincinnati. Like they haven't really done enough at that point in their careers. I'll put the Browns at 3 because I have a lot of high respect for their defense. And even though their quarterback is definitely the biggest question mark with this team, you still have a solid run game. You have tremendous pass catchers. You still have one of the best offensive lines in the league. I don't even think we got to talk about that as much. So I think that the Browns, they're going to pretty much pick up where they left off, even with their offense, being a little bit stuck in the mud, because I think your defense is going to be the biggest reason why you get back to the playoffs. And then, I want to put the Bengals at number 1, but I'll put the Ravens there for now just because you still have Lamar, you still have an elite you still have an awesome defense. You brought in Derrick Henry to load up the running game, and yeah, it might not be as dynamic or sexy as the Bengals offense, but I think with Lamar Jackson fully healthy, it's always going to be they're always going to be the biggest team in Cincinnati's way. But I would not be surprised if the Bengals somehow won this division because with Joe Burrow fully healthy and with the lot of weapons they have on their offense, and if the defense really turns the corner and really hits their strides, then yeah, we could definitely see them, beating the Ravens for this lead. So I'd say Baltimore, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. But again, that definitely could change.
Yeah, we're in
Your
agreement.
list might actually be more realistic if we really think about it, because like you said, the Ravens do fall into that trap where you have an outstanding season 1 year, and then the next it's good, but it's not great enough.
Yeah. No, I could see that happening as well. So,
all right. Well, the verdict is in. Our picks are locked, and I think to wrap up the show, we find out what our final 2 division previews are going to be. So because the final 2 ones are the AFC West and the NFC West, I figured we'd just make it easy and just put in the conferences to see which one we're going to do next week. So
crazy how
here
that
we
worked
go.
out. It is crazy.
I know. And 2 of them and they both have the 2 Super Bowl teams. So there you go.
Right.
All right. We got the AFC West next week. And then in 2 weeks, it's the final one. where we talk about the NFC West. Next week is actually going to be pretty fun because obviously we get to talk about the Chiefs, and your hope to God that the Chargers, remove the stench of Brandon Staley and replace it with the fresh scent of Jim Harbaugh. And then you got the Broncos and the Raiders who are on the outside looking in. So who knows? Maybe they'll shock us all, or they'll just play the way that we expect them to, which is not inspiring, but not terrible either. But thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for additional content. We have 2 more division previews. Then we have week 1 picks, and then all the weekly recaps start. So I'm just waiting for that point to start, or waiting for that to arrive, because I just can't keep watching Hard Knocks and preseason football. Not that I don't like it, but it's just not the thing that we've been waiting for months. So
Yeah.
have a great rest of your week. Enjoy your August because it's going to go pretty quickly. And we'll see you next week with the AFC West. Peace, everyone.